Hi, I'm Nancy LeBove. I'm the founder of Alumni in Recovery. I have worked as a nurse in addiction and mental health for over 20 years. I'm also a woman in long-term recovery from addiction, alcohol, drug use. It's also known as substance use disorder. Addiction is preventable. We live in a time that we need to be extremely conscious and mindful of the substances that we put into our bodies and why. We can no longer use recreationally without extreme care and mindfulness. 93,331 people died of overdose deaths in 2020. Alumni in Recovery are local people speaking openly of our experiences with active addiction.
Hi, my name is Tom Canavan, Director of the Alumni in Recovery Parent Program. My son Christopher died at the age of 29 in July 2015. After his meaningless death, I sought some way of making a difference to help prevent other children and adults from going down the same path of meaningless destruction. Alumni in Recovery is that powerful tool to bring awareness, hope, and resources to our schools and communities. Please watch the video that follows and share it with your families, schools, and communities. Start a conversation that will bring awareness about addiction in your communities and schools. It's important to understand that addiction is a disease and must be treated as such.
We also want you to be aware of the Good Samaritan law, to call 911 if someone's unconscious or unresponsive and get them the life-saving medical help they need without fear of prosecution from law enforcement. We must all work together and help each other and prevent this brain disease from taking more lives. Thank you for watching.
Hey, my name's Ruben. I'm 23 years old. I'm from Clifton, New Jersey, and my clean date is January 7th, 2017. So growing up, I grew up as an only child with a single mother. My father had drugs and alcohol addiction. It ran on his side of the family, and he was never really around in my life. He left when I was 2. My mother raised me with great values and morals. And growing up in my area, especially living right next to Paterson, New Jersey, which is like the heroin capital of New Jersey, I grew up seeing a lot of panhandling and a lot of homeless people. I always kind of pictured that's what drugs and alcohol looked like on a person. And knowing that my father was an addict and an alcoholic, I knew that I didn't want to get involved with drugs or alcohol. I had no desire for that. But I did think that drinking and smoking weed every now and then was normal for teenagers. By the time I was in 6th grade, I had started experimenting with smoking pot. It was a very rare thing. I did it maybe once. I would share a joint with a couple friends. By 7th grade, I had started smoking more often, more frequent. By 8th grade, I started skipping school. I would rather stay home and smoke than go to school. Being under the influence, I got kicked out of my 8th grade school. They sent me to a IOP, which stands for Intense Outpatient Program. When I started going to these programs, I started meeting more people. I started making connections. Students that are involved in gangs or coming in and out of juvenile hall. I had to start seeing a therapist and a psychiatrist that the school sent me to. Eventually, the psychiatrist prescribed me a low dose of Ativan. I started abusing those pills in 8th grade. The end of 9th grade, I was in my second alternative school. I had a full-on pill habit with benzos, Klonopin, Xanax, and I found myself now not only taking those pills, I started smoking weed again, heavily so. I started taking other pills as well. The doctors were putting me on all kinds of psychiatric meds. They had taken me off the Xanax when they found out that I had a pill habit. And I started smoking Spice K2 synthetic weed. Because of smoking that stuff, it had led me to a few psychiatric visits. I had 7 trips to the hospital. I had been arrested many times. I remember I would get very physically and verbally and emotionally abusive with my family, people I'd meet. A lot of those morals and values that I grew up with my mom really just went out the window. I started stealing. And then I started stealing from my mother. Being a single mother supporting an only child who already had enough fines and bills from the doctors and the trips to the hospitals and everything else. My mom didn't really have enough money as is. And here I am stealing money from my poor mom who raised me showed me the best life she could. And my mother would be so upset because, you know, my father, he passed away in 2016 from drug use. And so for my mother to see her only son, you know, going down that path, it completely ruined her. That feeling for the drugs was more powerful to me than seeing my own mother crying. The late nights my mother would spend up waiting for her son to get home, hoping that he gets home because he's out running the streets in Patterson. It was a very fast, progressive downhill spiral. I was now hanging out with people in their early 20s. I started taking more drugs. Pills were more accessible. I didn't realize everything nowadays has fentanyl in it. I'll never forget, I was on probation. I kept failing all my urine tests. I was looking at going to juvenile hall for a few years if I didn't clean up my act. I had 4 of my wisdom teeth removed at once, and they prescribed me a low dose of generic form of Percocet, and I started abusing those. I remember my mother, when she found out I was abusing painkillers, she took them, went into the middle of the street, and she stomped them out in the middle of the street. And then she went back in the house, and I ran out in my underwear, and it was probably mid-November. I ran out in my underwear, and my mother locked the door behind her, and I was in the middle of the street, and I live on a busy street. I was in the middle of the street in my underwear, picking up these little crumbs of the pills my mother had just stomped out, putting them in my hands. I mean, my sense of self-respect was gone. At the age of 16, I stopped going to school entirely. My main focus was getting high. If I didn't have something in my system, I didn't feel right. There was no longer any fun to it at all. By the time I was 16 years old, me getting drugs had become a chore. The people I was hanging out with had no respect for themselves or anybody else around them. I was hanging out in some pretty messed up places that people shouldn't go. I was finding bullet casings on the floor, rolled up mattresses laying around, and here I am sitting around there taking pills and smoking and, you know, being a little run mule for these grown people. I saw how bad things were by the consequences, but I didn't really see how messed up I really was until looking back at it now. My skin was literally a light green color. Sleep was non-existent. I didn't really eat much, period. 16, I had all this stuff falling apart around me, and I had this opportunity to go out of state, to go to Virginia for a few years to go get help at a wilderness program. It was only until I became completely willing and ready to get the help that I needed that I got the help that I needed. So the way that I stay sober, I stay involved, heavily involved with the recovery community. I have a lot of young friends my age, people who are in recovery. We have fun. We have a great time. We go to pool parties, we go on trips, go to the beach, go to concerts. You know, I'm planning a trip to the Renaissance Fair with some of my friends. I go to meetings, doing a lot of service work, one of those being I'm a volunteer for Alumni in Recovery. I've been involved for a few years. Alumni in Recovery brings this video to you. We're a nonprofit organization, and we're a group of young people who just go around trying to let people know, hey, look, like, you could be young and you could be clean and have fun. I have fun, man. I didn't have fun when I was using drugs. It wasn't fun at all. It might have felt a little fun while the high was there, but after a while, that wasn't even fun. We hope to break down these walls and barriers and stigmas of addiction to let you know that there is hope out there, and let's start getting the conversation started. Let's start talking about this stuff. I know that, you know, if you're in school, you have a lot of those guidance counselors and teachers around, and it might be kind of like weird or something. I'm not gonna talk about that in front of that teacher. You know, your teachers weren't born yesterday, and I'm sure they didn't crawl out of a rock. You know, they were your age 2 once, and you know, you're not the first students that they've had before. So instead of us trying to just keep hiding and turning around from the corner, I mean, this past year, we had over 93,000 deaths from overdoses alone. That's, I mean, these numbers are staggering, and it's like 1 in 20 people are getting affected from this. Even if it's not you personally who's struggling from a problem, if it's somebody you know who's struggling from a problem, there is help out there, there is hope out there. You know, a lot of it is free. People will work with you in your insurances. Just don't be afraid to ask. There's nothing wrong with saying, I have a problem, I can't stop. I can't. Look at how many famous people there are, musicians, actors. How many famous people have publicly come out who are openly out against, you know, drugs and are in recovery. You know, there's nothing cool or tough about using drugs, and especially definitely not selling drugs.